Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chris Koopman.
So I want to start out the presentation today with a story, but first, is anyone here from Montana? Nobody here from Montana. Okay, so this is a picture of Hardin, Montana, population approximately 3,500. And I was talking recently with the Attorney General, Tim Fox, of Montana. Now this is his hometown. This is where he's from, and he was talking to me about his thoughts on the sharing economy. And he explained it to me like this. He said, "Well, for a young couple like me, I just got married a year ago. So he said, someone like you living in Hardin, Montana, there are bars, there are restaurants, there are things to do. But if you and your wife wanted to go out and have a few drinks and then have a safe ride home, you'd likely have to call a taxi company or another car service hours in advance to plan out your evening. That's typically the way it goes. There's about 1 or 2 taxis operating in the town at any one time. And he said, likely at the end of your evening, you might call, and it's a 50-50 shot whether or not the taxi will actually come when you scheduled them. Sometimes you might actually call, and the driver has gone to bed for the evening and says, sorry, I'm not interested in driving tonight anymore. And he said, well, it's not for a lack of cars, and it's not for a lack of people wanting cars. It's more or less the inability of connecting those people who have cars with those people who want rides. And that's really the story of the sharing economy as most people see it right now. It's revolved around transportation, in particular Uber and Lyft and the other ride-sharing companies that have more or less grown exponentially over the past 18 to 24 months. But the sharing economy is broader than that, and as Trevor mentioned, it encompasses all sorts of the economy, all sorts of things that we do in our daily lives. But really, the question is, like, beyond getting rides, what is the sharing economy? Like, what really is it? It's more than just an app to get cars. But first, let's just talk a little bit about the term the sharing economy. So this is just a chart over time, over the past 5 years, of the number of times the various terms have been used to describe the sharing economy, just in Bloomberg. You'll see, for a while it was referred to as collaborative consumption, the 1099 economy, the on-demand economy, and then the sharing economy. That's sort of the term that's really taken off recently. You'll see sort of the spike in March of 2014. That's when Uber and Airbnb really started to butt heads with the city government in New York City, which naturally caught the attention of an outlet like Bloomberg. But if you were to look, at all of the outlets and the use and Google Trends, and you can see this, there's been this rapid rise in the term sharing economy. There's not much sharing going on. It's people exchanging and producing and interacting with one another. It's not a lot of sharing anymore. Maybe early on with something like couch surfing or something like that, there was real sharing. It's not really sharing anymore, but just like you can't pick your nickname, sometimes you get names and they stick. So the sharing economy is more or less the general term. It's not, trying to define exactly what it is. Again, there's not much sharing going on anymore. So what is the sharing economy? I want to tell just a slightly different story. This is a friend of mine from law school. His name's Ernie. And actually, he doesn't practice law. He practices graphic design. That's what he went to undergrad for, and then he got a law degree and decided, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to be a graphic designer. So he goes out on his own to do graphic design and realizes in South Florida, where he lives, the business is not steady. It comes and it goes. It ebbs and flows as he gets jobs, as he, finds clients, does the stuff for them, and then looks for the next clients. So he's trying to figure out, how do I smooth out my income? How do I make things work when bills are due, when I got to buy groceries, when I got to pay rent, all that sort of activity. Now, his situation would be a lot different, let's say 5, 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago. He would be in a lot different situation. In particular, if he would have tried to do this 20 years ago, he's trying to find odd jobs to do. That's essentially what he's doing now, is he's graphic design part-time, and the rest of the time he's picking up the slack where he can find it. He's really good at odd jobs. He's handy. He can do all sorts of things. But 20 years ago, he'd have really, really difficult time making that work for himself. Maybe he'd post an ad in the newspaper and say handyman for hire. Maybe he would go door to door and tell his neighbors, I'll buy your groceries for you if you want me to buy your groceries. I'll go do shopping. I'll do whatever. I'm just, a friendly neighbor looking to make things work. But today, his situation is drastically different. It allows him the flexibility and the mobility to choose to be a graphic designer on his own and make it work. Now, what changed? I think technological changes occurred that give him now the ability to connect with people in ways he couldn't have done, even 5 years ago. In particular, he simply just opens an app and he can shop for people, groceries. He can open an app and find people who actually need him to install a doorknob, reinstall the hood on their 1987 Cabriolet, which was an odd job that he picked up a few weeks ago. But what the beauty of this is that he doesn't have to worry about haggling on terms. He doesn't have to worry about figuring out, is this person going to pay me or not? He doesn't have to worry, is the person that I'm about to enter into a contract with, are they trustworthy? He logs into platforms like Instacart, like TaskRabbit, like Thumbtack, and he's able to get some degree of certainty, particularly with the reputational mechanisms. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the reputational mechanisms that are inherent in these, and really a hallmark of these sharing economy companies, that allow him to know how have people done in the past, is a good indication as how well they will do in the future when he interacts with them. So back to transportation, which I think all of you are pretty familiar with. I think everyone here has ridden in an Uber, I'm assuming. We're all familiar with Uber, Lyft, and these ones. So transportation, I think, is the one that really dominates, but it is much broader than that. And my colleagues and I have, we've tried to define these sector of firms that are really innovating the way that people can exchange and produce. And we came up with a somewhat technical definition, and that is the sharing economy can be a term to describe the class of firms that use the internet to connect dispersed networks of individuals to take otherwise underutilized resources and put them to productive use. Right? That's a mouthful. It's awkward. You're probably thinking to yourself, like, what does that even mean? I think there's a really easy way, I think, to define the sharing economy, and that's just taking what you've got and making it work for you. My buddy Ernie is making it work for himself, and he has a degree of flexibility and mobility to pursue the career he wants, because in the meantime, he can pick up the slack through these platforms. So I know you all have a handout that it looks like a honeycomb. I just want to go through that and really try to broaden the definition of the sharing economy. I think the conversation, particularly the policy conversation to this point, has really surrounded ride sharing. And a lot of the policy responses to the sharing economy have been particular responses to what is happening in ride sharing. But it's much broader than that. So you have transportation in the bottom left of that honeycomb, and that includes things like Uber, Lyft, Sidecar, the really popular apps, the tens of billions of dollars in valuation that these firms are getting, stealing a lot of headlines and catching the attention of state and local and now federal policymakers as they figure out how do we respond to this. But I really want to stress that it is much broader than that. So it includes, as Trevor said, it includes transportation, hospitality, space, workspace, sort of like office sharing apps that are now springing up. It includes goods, like 1,000 tools, services that connect people who have things like power tools with people who would like to use them but may not want to purchase a miter saw or some sort of piece of power tool that you're only going to use once or twice. But it also includes things like the service industry. So as I mentioned before, my buddy Ernie using Instacart, which is an app that connects people who would like groceries, busy people like yourselves, maybe that don't have time to shop as much as you'd like, connects people that like that with people who are willing to go to the grocery store, to Costco, or somewhere like that, shop for them, bring it to their house. It also includes things like TaskRabbit, which is something just for odd jobs, all sorts of odd jobs. And all sorts of things are available on there. Pretty much if you can do something, you you could probably find somebody on TaskRabbit that would like that thing done. And it's connecting people in new, innovative ways. There's also things like professional services. Odesk, for example, is one where people typically will outsource the jobs they don't want to do to someone else willing to do it for them. Things like data entry or transcribing a PDF into a Word document, or taking things and just rearranging work and doing things that maybe lower level tasks, so you can focus on higher value uses of your time. That's sort of what a service like Odesk does. But it also includes food. There are things like Feastly and Eat With, two of these apps they're really popular in New York and San Francisco right now. They're sort of starting to grow in DC. I think there are actually only 2 being offered this weekend through Feastly. One is like a seafood extravaganza. There's a chef in Oxon Hill that's going to cook a seafood extravaganza for people who want to come to her house and pay for her to cook. She's a chef and she wants to share that talent with people, and she might not want to do it in a restaurant. Sometimes these people will come to your house and cook for you. You're having a dinner party and you want to chef. You can connect with people and have these things brought to your house. But there's also things like shared food prep. There's Blue Apron, for example. People who are nutritionists or food professionals are able to connect with people who are really busy, want healthy eating, and don't have time to shop, pick out the right ingredients, and prepare dishes for themselves. So what they do is they send you a box with all the ingredients ready prepared and a recipe, and you take the stuff and you cook it and you make it, and you can focus on other things. And that's really what the sharing economy is about. It's for consumers. Typically, is anyone actually using the sharing economy as a producer, as a worker? Is anyone using it to pick up like side jobs or anything like that? Okay. Well, it's creating value for consumers, and I'm sure you all see that every day when you touch the button on your Uber app and a driver shows up in a black car in a matter of minutes. But it's also providing opportunities for the people working in the sharing economy as well. But there are some things in the backdrop here, and especially as these policy questions bubble up and become more relevant to federal policymakers, there's some economics in the background that I think are important to understand, and that will help you all really get a better grip as to what's happening in the sharing economy and why firms are organizing the way they are, and why certain things are happening the way that they are actually happening. So the first one of these is the concept of asymmetric information. So typically, the growth of the sharing economy and a lot of the headlines as they've butted heads with state and local regulators has been over consumer protection regulations. These are regulations, think that all the taxi regulations that were put in place to protect you, the rider. All of this was justified 30, 40, sometimes 70 years ago on the idea that there is information imbalances, there's asymmetries. The driver has more information about how they're going to act than you do, and they can take advantage of that to misuse the contractual relationship. You get in a car and you say, give me a ride to this place. The regulations are in place, particularly in taxis, to make sure that actually happens and it's done in a safe and proper way. The sharing economy has developed tools, typically the 5-star peer-to-peer rating system is one that allow people to overcome information asymmetries without the need for these regulations anymore. It's sort of outmoding and outgrowing the old regulatory structure to provide people with more information than they were even getting before. So I'm sure this screen is familiar to all of you. Every time you're done with an Uber ride, one of these pops up, and you have the ability on a 1 to 5 rating to rate the driver. I'm sure as you're all familiar as well, the driver gets one of these too and has the opportunity to do the exact same thing. Now, these ratings aren't secret. I mean, you see the driver's rating when he's or she is about to pick you up, and the driver sees your rating, and it gives them some indication and gives you some indication as to how this person has performed in the past and how well the experience will go now. You can also, if you don't know your Uber rating, you can email Uber, and they will tell it. Yeah, they will tell you your rating. I'm a 4.6. I think that's good. I don't really know. So it's who knows? Maybe a lot of 4.5s. I'm assuming. I don't know. But it gives you a really good indication as to how people have performed in the past. Again, with like TaskRabbit, for example, let's say someone says, I can install your door for you on, you're putting a new door in your home or your apartment or something or whatever, and you want to find someone to do it for you. You're just like, I'm just not too sure how to do it. I don't want to screw it up. I'd rather rely on someone else that has more experience and the better capabilities than me. You can get on TaskRabbit and you can see how well these people have performed in the past. So if someone says, like, I'm an expert mechanic, let me fix your car, and you see a whole bunch of 2 ratings, and they're like, well, he, took all the wheels off and then went to lunch and left me without a car for 3 days or something like this. You know that, and the information asymmetries are really overcome through this 2-party rating system. But what you have is sort of this growing tension between all these consumer protection regulations that say you must carry out your business in a certain way, and these sharing economy companies that say, well, we don't need those because we're handling it our own way. So is anyone here from Nevada? Has anyone here been to Las Vegas? Yeah, kind of head nods. Have you been long-hauled? Do you know if you've been long-hauled? So as long as tourists have been going to Las Vegas, there's something called long-hauling, and essentially taxis, there's a short way and a long way. And taxis will take you the long way. They run up a charge. So this is something that regulators in Nevada have spent a lot of time trying to solve. They've done things like undercover sting operations. They've done things like giant signs that say, like, on the side of the road that say, you're being taken the wrong way. They have signs like in the airport that's like, if you go through a tunnel, you've gone the wrong way. They've done all sorts of things to try to help people figure out if they're being taken for a ride by their taxi driver. But they haven't been able to fix it. So now, recently, I mean, this was about a year ago, the Nevada Taxi Authority was floating the idea of installing GPS trackers in all the taxis that they would pay for through a tax on riders. So essentially raising the cost for people to get to the Las Vegas Strip to ensure that they're not being overcharged for a ride to the Las Vegas Strip. But with what you have with Uber and Lyft and the peer-to-peer rating system, as well as the map function and the GPS, instantaneously if you've been taken the wrong way. Not only do you know it, but you have almost instant recourse. You give a 1. If any of you have ever given a 1 on a below a 3, I guess, in the Uber app, it asks you right away. It gives you some pre-filled options, and it says bad customer service, didn't pick me up, a whole host of things. And then you can type in, and in a matter of minutes, maybe a half hour, an hour, typically the problem is resolved. In Nevada, for example, there was a bit of an issue, and Nevada banned Uber. I think they just recently allowed them back in to provide service to people, but you have the service, a new innovative service providing people new means to overcome old problems. And it's the regulatory system saying, sorry, not today. Maybe down the road when we determine whether or not you're actually safe, as you claim, and whether or not consumers want you or not, we have to wait and see. So there is this growing tension, and you're seeing this across the country. Some states are now starting to pass laws to incorporate Uber and Lyft and the ride sharing into the regulated environment. But it is an issue, and it really has to do with who protects consumers better, the market or regulations. In this case, you have firms being able to provide new innovative means for people to solve old problems, and it's just not something that's been foreseen, and typically something that pushes regulators and policymakers to think long and hard about the laws on the books in light of changes in the economy. The second one is network effects. Now, backing it up for a second, the 2-party rating system does provide a huge incentive for you when you're in the car to be the best rider you can be. It provides a huge incentive for the driver to be the best driver that they can be. It's pushing everyone because you know that you can no longer hide and be a bad party to a transaction, because the next person you deal with will know to a certain degree how the last transaction went. So it pushes everyone to be the best version of themselves. But there's also these incentives among the firms as well. So the one thing I want to talk about is network effects. So a different example would be the telephone. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, it was huge, innovative, new, different, but he had no one to call. The telephone is only as valuable as the number of people he can connect with the telephone. And that's what the network effects are, is essentially the value to consumers grows as more people join the network. And this is the same thing with the sharing economy companies also. It's cool if you have the sleekest, nicest, newest app out there, but if nobody's using it, it's really not worth much anything at all. The real value comes in the ability to connect people. So these companies, especially the sort of the main players right now in the sharing economy, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, their multi-billion-dollar valuations are really a valuation of all of the capital, all of the idle resources that they're bringing to life. So all of these spare bedrooms that are now being put to use that weren't being put to use before, all of these cars that may have been sitting in a driveway, or all of these people's time that may not have been put to productive use is now being put to productive use. And these networks are large, but there is a huge incentive for these firms to not use and abuse their operators or their partners. And there's also an incentive for them to not abuse their consumers as well, because as easy as it is for you to switch from app A to app B, I mean, it's that easy for a company to go from $40 billion to nothing, right? So there's a huge incentive for these companies to be the best version of themselves as well. So there's all of these incentives for everyone in the sharing economy to push themselves, to interact with people in the right way, and to do things the best they can, because they know if you're not, people will no longer want to do business with you, and it will have effects. You know, if you say you're a good mechanic and you're not, people aren't going to hire you to be a mechanic through these systems. If you say you're a good driver and you're not, you won't last very long on these sharing economy apps. People won't want rides from you. So it's really pushing these firms to create value in ways for consumers and to protect consumers and producers to ensure they all have the best experience they can. And the last sort of economic concept I want to talk about is the theory of the firm. So this is Ronald Coase. He won the Nobel Prize in the early 1990s. Wrote a paper in the 1930s, 1937, I think, that more or less predicted what's happening in the sharing economy. And he said something like this. He said, as transaction costs, as the cost of doing business is radically reduced, firms will not need to have these giant, massive operations. They will get slimmer and slimmer and smaller because there's no need to have someone as an employee to monitor and ensure that they're doing the best job. If the transaction costs are low and you can ensure that the person you're contracting with to do that same job is doing a good job, there's no need to hire them on full time if you can ensure that every one-off transaction you make is just as good as having them as an employee. So there's an economist at Duke that wrote a paper, sort of a joking paper about 10 years ago called "The Boss Doesn't Wear Bunny Slippers." And essentially he said transaction costs are still high, and he tells this story about a boss that one day decides, well, why do I have all these employees when I could just do everything via contract? And so he goes home and he puts on his bunny slippers and he tries to run the business from home, and everything goes horribly wrong. Because the contractor says, well, I know I said I'd make that delivery Friday, but we got a little backed up. We might not make it till Monday or Tuesday next week. The board of directors is like, you've ruined our business, you're fired. But in the sharing economy and the radical reduction in transaction costs, the boss can wear bunny slippers. You could start a company, and you can operate a company from your own home, engaging in services like Fiverr, Odesk, TaskRabbit, and all of these other services that provide people on demand that can provide the service that you're looking for. So it radically changes the equation for how people transact with one another. Or do they engage in long-term employment agreements or these shorter-term contracts between one another, given the fact that there's really no longer a need for someone to say, I only want to work for you, when they could say I could work for 30 of you at one time. And so those are, I think, three main concepts to understand sort of in the backdrop of the sharing economy. And it provides some lens to understand why firms are acting the way they are, why people are transacting the way they are, and ultimately why the sharing economy is growing and developing the way that it is. So what can policymakers do about all of this. So for the most part in the for the most part of the sharing economy's growth over the last, let's say 4 or 5 years or so, Washington has pretty much remained on the sidelines, taking a wait-and-see approach. And that void has been filled by state and local policymakers that are passing laws, sometimes banning these services. But really, that's where a lot of the action has been up to this point in the growth of the sharing economy and a lot of these policy debates. But as the sharing economy grows, 80 million Americans, a recent study, 80 million Americans have engaged in the sharing economy in some form or fashion. So this is a huge, huge question. And I think in the next 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 months, a lot of these questions are finally going to start bubbling up to the surface. And it's finally, I think, going to be an opportunity for federal policymakers to figure out what they can do in light of changes in the market, in particular the sharing economy. And I think there are 3 I want to highlight for you. The first one being, overall, I would say a good place to start would be to look at what's already in place, identify what works, figure out what doesn't, and fix those things first. Fix what's already in place before adding more to an already increasingly complex regulatory puzzle. But the first thing policymakers could do is focus on simplifying the tax system for the little guy. So you're hearing people refer to the sharing economy as the 1099 economy. Well, a lot of that has to do with the 1099-K, the form that sharing economy operators get for their independent contractor income. A recent study of sharing economy operators, they were surveyed and they were asked, what is the largest source of pain for you operating as an independent contractor? Over a third of them said understanding their tax and legal obligations. A quarter of them said tracking income and expenses. In particular, they're doing that for tax purposes and when it comes time to pay their tax bill. So that's half of the people operating in the sharing economy that were surveyed said the biggest point of pain for them is the tax issue. So identifying places where you can simplify, streamline, and make it easier for the little guy. Again, the primary drivers in the sharing economy aren't large operations with teams of lawyers to help them sort it out. It's the individuals. It's the guy, my friend Ernie, making it work. It's people going from task to task, gig to gig. I think is the gig economy is another term being used right now. But it's those people. And making it easier for them to understand allows them to focus less on how do they comply with tax and legal obligations and more how do they create value for themselves and for those around them. I think the second issue, and this is again a growing issue and one that is becoming increasingly relevant in the public policy debate, is the employer-employee or employer-contractor relationship. Are they employees or contractors? This is sort of the big issue now. And this is again from that survey I mentioned before. They asked these operators, how long have you been an independent contractor? 84% of them said that they've been doing it for less than 3 years. 2/3 of them said they've been doing it less than 1 year. This is a growing trend. These people are jumping in. If you look at the demographics about who's actually operating and producing in the sharing economy, typically it's people 18 to 29. It's millennials who have a college degree or are currently pursuing their education. It's young single people who are piecing it together as they figure out, what do I want to do with my life? But increasingly there are bigger questions facing the sharing economy than how do I get my next gig? And it's questions like this. This is an issue playing out in states like California and Florida right now, as well as federal courts in Massachusetts and California as well. And recently the judge in the California case, when deciding that it would go to a jury, so 12 people are now going to have to figure out this really prickly question for that case. The judge said something like this: the current application of the legal standard provides no clear answer. And the jury is now given the choice of a square peg and 2 round holes. And that's what they're left with. So this is one that, as it increasingly becomes an issue to figure out, are there solutions to this problem? is there some sort of solution out there that we can find? And typically, people think, well, it's a complex problem. It needs a complex solution. Well, more often than not, simple solutions will suffice, and it may be something as simple as reevaluating the standards for employer, employee, or contractor, contractee, and figuring out how do we change that to account for changes in the market today that weren't envisioned 50 years ago when when a lot of these laws were put into place. And then finally, for policymakers in Washington, it's understanding what Washington can do, what the federal government can do, and what the federal government is just not something that the federal government typically handles. So a lot of August is coming up. Members are heading back to their districts for summer recess, the town hall meetings and all these things that go on. And these are issues people are going to be talking about. Uber is taking all the taxi jobs, or why don't we have more sharing economy companies, or what can we do? A lot of this is just understanding Washington's role, what policymakers can do versus what are things that just are outside the scope. So a lot of this, from a federal perspective, can be policymakers using the influence and the authority that they do have to encourage reforms at a state and local level. So this can be things like using those opportunities to speak with constituents to say, well, the federal government really doesn't handle taxi regulations. Here's the person that does, and here's a potential solution to the problem from our perspective, encouraging pro-competition, pro-market solutions that really put the consumer in a position to decide for themselves, but then also put the consumer in a position where they're empowered to make decisions for themselves. But that's not all that policymakers can do. Beyond this there's also some authority in the form of the Federal Trade Commission and other agencies that wield some authority to go after patently anti-competitive licensing regimes and regulations that exist on the books. And after sort of the Supreme Court here earlier this spring gave the FTC a little more leeway in going after these, this is another tool in a federal policymaker's arsenal to go after the things standing in the way of putting all of these people who are trying to make it work to work. But I think the real question for policymakers, this is just where I'm going to stop and conclude and open it up for questions, is this. The sharing economy is here to stay. It's not really going anywhere, and it's only going to continue to grow from this point on. The question really becomes, are we willing to adapt and evolve in light of all of these changing circumstances, or are we going to continue to try to insist on applying 20th century legal standards and 20th century theories to 21st century problems? And I think a lot of the question now is how do we change, how do we update, and how do we catch up to these innovations that have in a lot of ways outpaced policymakers over the past 5 or 6 years. So I'll just leave it at that and open it up to your questions. So thank you.